5, 6, 7, 8.
Hi EXers, welcome to the EX Podcast episode number 34. This is your host, Stefan Vincent. I've started this podcast because I believe that companies have to think of themselves as employment brands if they hope to attract and retain talent. The podcast brings a different lens to the employee experience, a brand and customer experience perspective rather than a traditional HR perspective. Our guests, all thought leaders and disruptors in the EX space in their own way, come to this show to debate, discuss, and share best practices on the key components that foster employee engagement and strengthen company culture, and also to spark the conversation on how to create positive employee experiences. One size doesn't fit all. What Airbnb or Google do around the employee experience may not be applicable in a smaller company. This is what this show is all about. Sharing stories of companies of all sizes, not only to show that EX doesn't require a large budget or a large team, but also that there isn't one recipe. Each company can find its own way through the EX journey. Today's guest is Scott Wintrip, calling from St. Petersburg, Florida. Scott is the author of High Velocity Hiring: How to Hire Top Talent in an Instant. Today with Scott we will talk about how talent acquisition is changing, how companies must engage in the new way of hiring, how to build a positive employee experience, how to link the candidate journey to the employee journey, how to measure success in talent acquisition, and what's the place of technology in talent acquisition. This week's EX podcast is sponsored by Structural. Structural unleashes the potential of people and teams by giving organizations real-time mobile access to employee data. Find, engage, and retain talent with a Structural Employee Success Platform. EX Podcast listeners can visit structural.com/EX Podcast to get access to the latest employee experience resources, including the Employee Success Playbook, featuring 10 research-backed methods to improve business outcomes. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you get a chance, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes and Google Play. If you would like to send me feedback, suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummits.com or on Twitter at @EX_summits. Thanks for your support. Let's get to it. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the EX podcast. Today's guest is Scott Wintrip, calling from St. Petersburg in Florida. Scott is the author of High Velocity Hiring: How to Hire Top Talent in an Instant. Published by McGraw-Hill, his book has been named a must-read book by Sherm's HR magazine, is in the top 100 books on Amazon, and has been featured in print, radio, podcasts, and TV, including Fast Company, Forbes, ABC, NBC, and Fox. Phew! Scott, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Stefan. So glad to be with you.
So for those who don't know you, tell us a bit more about who you are and what you do.
So I'm a hiring expert. That was never the plan. I originally went to school for music, and I was going to be a high school band director. And partway through my school, I walked into a staffing firm to get some temp work. And that's where I was introduced to recruiting. And the person across the desk from me actually said, "Scott, have you ever considered a career in this industry?" And my response was not very smart. At the time, I looked at her and said, "This is an industry?" But it planted a seed. And I enjoyed music, and I realized partway through school that being that kind of teacher was not what I really wanted to do. I wanted to help people find better jobs, and I wanted to help companies find good people. And there's a teaching element to that. And that put me on a path to be a recruiter successfully. both in the staffing and corporate space. And in '99, I founded this consultancy because I saw a trend. And the trend was that hiring was getting longer and hiring was fairly inaccurate. And the way people were hiring was also undermining the experience the candidates were having, and it was also undermining employment brands. And so I based my practice on eliminating hiring delays forever. That's what I've been doing for the past 18 years. And I pioneered a way for companies to fill their jobs the instant they become open by changing their process.
So what has changed in the talent acquisition space that forces companies to rethink how they approach when they recruit talent?
One of the biggest changes in the talent acquisition space, well, there's actually two, as I think through your question, is, the first is that there's a talent deficit. And we all know this. It's very, very real. It's only going to get worse. And the second issue then is that companies are afraid of making a hiring mistake. So in the talent acquisition space, the talent acquisition professionals are working very hard to find people in an overtapped talent pool. And once they find them and they put them in front of the hiring managers, there needs to be some element of speed because it's overtapped, there's not enough people. Yet the hiring managers want to go through a considerable amount of effort to make a hire. And 1 or 2 rounds of interviews have grown to 3, 4, 5. Sometimes I've heard this year about 6 separate rounds of interviews before making a hiring decision, all in an effort to get it right the first time. And so these two things are undermining not only good hiring and effective hires, because after multiple rounds of interviews and you're ready to make an offer, often the best people have already taken another offer with somebody else. And so the whole long drawn out process starts all over again. So this has had a tremendous impact on the talent acquisition space. The fact that these talent acquisition professionals are struggling in this overtapped labor pool, and then there are managers who are afraid of making a mistake. It calls for a change in process, which is where I come in, is to help them do things differently from start to finish to solve these common problems.
What are some of the broken practices that you see companies are still using or playing to the recruiting process?
We could probably spend the entire rest of our time together talking about the broken practices. I love that question. And so let me start with a general statement. The big thing I see broken more than anything else is mindset. Mm-hmm. And there are 2 mindsets in particular that I think are quite dangerous in today's world of work. The first one is that just because I've done something a certain way just because I've done something a certain way, it's right. I've always done it this way, so it must be right. The second mindset is that there's not enough talent to go around, which sounds counterintuitive given what I said a moment ago, but I promise I'll come back and clarify. Let me start with the first mindset. So this is how we've always done it, so it must be right. It's time that we challenge that mindset. And it is what's informing process. Mindset informs process. So if we don't start to change mindset, we can't have permanent change to process. So here's a very good example of one of those things that we've been doing for a very long time that we don't necessarily challenge because it's been done this way. And it's the statement, be slow to hire and quick to fire. That doesn't work in a fast-paced world that has an overtapped talent pool. Yet in many organizations, this slow to hire, quick to fire mindset, that is the mantra they live by. So if you combine that, this is how it's always been done, it must be right, that mindset, things like slow to hire, quick to fire, with this over fixation on the talent shortage. And yes, there's a talent shortage. If we take our arms and stretch them all the way out, that's the number of jobs. And if we put our hands back together very narrowly, that's the number of people there are to fill them. But the reality is, for anybody in talent acquisition, you're not trying to fill all those jobs as you spread out your arms. You're just trying to fill a handful. And when looked at in that light, there are more than enough candidates to fill that job. Now, why is that mindset incredibly dangerous? There's been a lot of research when it comes to negative mindsets. In my book, I quoted some research by Barbara Fredrickson, and she talked about undermining emotions. And any kind of emotions, negative emotions that make you feel like you're going to lose no matter what, kill your resourcefulness. So there are many organizations out there, and I tell the story of one organization in my book when I first met them, that they were so stuck in this mindset that there's not enough talent to go around, we're screwed, is basically what they thought. And because of that, they couldn't think their way out of that situation. When we looked at it in the perspective that they're not trying to fill everybody's job, so the talent shortage is actually irrelevant, they're only trying to fill their own, that changed their perspective. They started thinking about not can we change this, not can we fill our jobs, but how can we put a process in place that allows us to fill jobs not just quickly, but the moment they become open. So I think those are the most important things we should talk about is first mindset, then process. Because once we change our mindset, then we're open to better process ideas, different ways of interviewing, the fact that we're not maximizing all the talent streams to bring in people.
My perspective on this podcast is to look at the marketing and customer experience methodologies and strategies and how to apply them to the employee side. Now, for a few years, successful organizations have shifted from outbound to inbound marketing. And that's exactly what you suggest in your book when you said that companies must stop participating in the old way of hiring, meaning keeping a job until the right person shows up. And instead, they should engage in the new way of hiring, which is cultivating top talents until the right job shows up. Can you expand on this?
Yeah, a lot of companies are stuck in that old way of hiring. And this is how they've always done it, so it must be right. We have to wait for the right person to come along. Well, if you think about it this way, Stefan, an open seat in an organization is like an open wound. It is a painful distraction. If I'm a manager and a seat's opened up in my department, I go from having one job to now having three. Now, first, I've got to do my regular job. I've got to manage my overflowing desk, all those emails, all those calls, people poking their head in my office. But then I have to manage the workload of that open seat as well, my second job. Some of the things I can delegate. Some of them I'll do myself because I'm good at it, and a few of them can wait. But no matter what, I'm now responsible for that work too. But wait, there's more. There's a third job, and that third job is I have to interview to fill that open seat while managing that workload, while doing my day job. This is where the undermining of brand begins. We've got distracted leaders trying to make critical decisions. They've got too much on their plate and they're overwhelmed. So when candidates walk in the door, they're not getting these managers at their best. They're having an interviewing experience that is less than optimal because that manager is stressed and overwhelmed. So you put on top of that the fact that there's often more than that one empty seat. Plus, you put on top of that we have 1 or 2 rounds of interviews that have grown to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. That's not a great starting experience. That's the foundation of candidate experience right there. And here's the problem. We've got some amazing companies out there with brand names that we all know who are engaging in this practice. Yet this is the foundation that they build. And this is why some of their competitors with less than well-known brand names are coming in and swooping up and grabbing that talent because they have a more efficient process. They're setting a standard and an experience that makes candidates go, that big brand, they're pretty exciting, but what's going on over here is even more exciting. So, because how we interview sends a message.
Yeah, we'll talk a bit further on this, but let me ask you a question right now. Is oftentimes in companies, you're going to have the hiring manager who's going to reach out to maybe HR and say, hey, I have a need for this, and could you help me, or could you write a job description for me? Here are the outlines or the highlines of what the job description could be. So HR is going to define what the job description should be and what type of skill sets or profiles the company should be looking for, and then hands out that information to recruiting, and recruiting oftentimes doesn't even communicate to their hiring manager to really understand what their hiring manager is looking for. So you have a disconnect between what the hiring manager's vision is in terms of the person to fill that position, the way it's translated by HR in words in the job description, and the recruiting manager who is just looking at the job description and really have no idea or may not have any idea of what the actual hiring manager is looking for. Is it what you see as well in companies?
Oh, yeah. I wish you could see my bobbleheading. My head was like one of those bobbleheads in a car as you said that. You articulated that beautifully. And you said something so important. The problem starts the moment the hiring manager delegates that job description to HR. Mm-hmm. This has to be a collaboration. No matter how good the HR department is, no matter how excellent the talent acquisition team is, no one knows that job like the manager who's leading that job. So in my book, there's an entire chapter dedicated to what I call the hire right profile. It is a very simple grid system that delineates between the must-haves and the must-not-haves. I call those deal makers and deal breakers. If we start there and we collaborate and we look for the patterns, I think this is the most important thing to talk about here. If we look for the patterns, what were the patterns of behavior, skill, background, personality of the people who did well on the job? The same thing on the other side. What are the patterns of the unproductive behaviors, the unhelpful skills, the personalities that didn't fit, and the people who didn't work out on the job? If we start there, now we go back to your key word, communication. We are all on the same page. And we can do this more quickly, too. This is about a 20 to 30-minute exercise if done right when we get everybody in the room, the recruiter, the HR folks, and the hiring manager. Once we start there, we have common ground for our communication. As a recruiter, once I come up with candidates, I can refer back to the manager and say, I've been checking things off on this hire right profile. I've already identified that they have 6 of the deal makers and none of the deal breakers. If we start there, we're on target, we're putting the right people in the role. And back to your candidate experience and brand thing, if we're bringing in the right people, that starts to build the brand because we're showing that we're smart and we're paying attention to detail and we're only bringing in people who fit.
And that's very interesting because one of the techniques for job hunting from the candidate's perspective is to try to bypass HR and make contact directly with the hiring manager. Right, and yes. I'll share with you a personal story, and I've heard it from other people I know as well, is a couple of times I applied to a position in a company, and it was, I submitted my resume online, and it was rejected. In the same time, I was reaching out to the hiring manager, and the hiring manager actually set up a meeting, and I met with him. So on one side, my application was rejected by HR, but I was able to set up meetings with the hiring manager and his supervisor and so forth by going directly to him. So definitely the process is broken here.
It is. The fact that people have seen the need to have a workaround, and there's a bit of a vilification of HR in your story. And I heard it too. I've been part of it, to be incredibly candid. I started out on the third-party agency side. And in the beginnings of my career, I experienced this from a recruiter perspective. It was often more productive to go directly to the hiring manager than to HR. Looking back now, that doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't bring all parties to the table because HR plays a critical role.
Correct.
So how do we solve this? Well, I go back to the profile. If we start the line of communication by collectively and collaboratively defining the role, we're getting off on the right foot. We're all, because the hiring manager knows the role well, but the recruiters may see things from their perspective, or HR may see things that HR does not. But here's another point to this, Stefan, that I think is important. I personally no longer care how that candidate got in the door. If they came in through HR, fantastic. If they came in because the hiring manager was playing their part in working their network, fantastic. in this overtapped talent pool that we have, I think we have to stop caring so much about how people are getting in the door and just get them in the door. And once from there, then we work them through the process because the collaboration already began. And so if we're all doing that, if HR and the recruiting team and talent acquisition are working all of their angles and all the talent streams, if the hiring managers are also working their networks at the same time, these are some of the simple secrets to making sure that we have a robust flow of talent coming in, and then we're all on the same page because we have the profile, and there's no good guys and bad guys in this one, because at the end of the day we all win because we got the top talent in the door and in the right seats right when we need them.
I agree. Going back to employer branding, we touched on it a little bit. Employer branding, or EB, is buzzing right now. And with companies such as GE or GoDaddy, which both we had on the show a few weeks ago, or Airbnb and Google, they're leveraging their consumer brand recognition and appeal and turning it into a powerful employer brand. Is EB now a true differentiator for companies?
Oh, it is. And, the companies that you name, I just stayed in an Airbnb just outside of Philadelphia. Big fan. And GoDaddy is our hosting company. So I know these brands well. And who doesn't know GE? What I love about employer branding is it's getting employers to pay attention to the impacts they have, not just from a buyer perspective, but from an employer perspective. And one of the things I see about employer branding that is a mistake is that it's not just about the consumer experience. It's not just about the quality of the product. It's not just about how you're seen in the marketplace. It's about everything that you do, including hiring. And so while your brand in the public is so critical and so important when it comes to the service you provide, the branding experience doesn't stop there. It either picks up or continues in hiring. And I've noticed in hiring, there are three things that either enhance your existing brand, good or bad, or undermine it. One of those is the speed at which you hire, fast or slow. The second is how you conduct your interviews. That sends a strong message. A long, drawn-out process doesn't make you look confident. It undermines your brand. And then whether you're active or reactive in how you cultivate talent. And you talked about it before, the old way of hiring versus the new way of hiring. So keeping a job open until the right person shows up, or the new way, cultivating talent and waiting for the right jobs to show up. If we do that, plus the other two things, speed and change how you conduct interviews, it will enhance a great brand and it will improve a good brand. And everybody wins. We get the right people in the door, and it'll take a good company and make them great because they have better people. It'll even take a company that's fair and make them better because they've got great people who deliver better service, better products, better experiences to their customers.
One of the challenges is that companies they're going to promote a value proposition through branding, whether it's to consumers or to candidates, right? But oftentimes they fail at delivering on the brand promise. They promise something through advertising, social media, their website, or how it's great to work for the company. But then when you get hired and you start on the onboarding process and you get in your job, what was sold to you is not really the reality. What do you think of this? Have you seen this in companies that you work with?
I'm bobbleheading. You get me bobbleheading a lot today. The words that go through my mind that illustrate what you just talked about is many companies offer promises, but they don't back it up with proof. Mm-hmm. So a value proposition is a promise. This is what we can do for you. This is how we can improve your life with our product. This is how we can enhance your company with our service. Or from an employer branding perspective, this is what we can do for your career. And then they put somebody through a long, drawn-out, 5-round interview process. And it completely undermines what the promise said. If the promise is that we advance people's careers quickly and diligently because we believe in people. So that's the employer branding value proposition statement. But then you put somebody through a long, drawn-out process. Candidates either consciously or unconsciously are going, wait a minute. I'm not so sure that this brand is real or true. So anything that is incongruent with your stated brand to the buying public or your stated brand to candidates actually makes you look less than honest. And I know that's not the intent. I know most people who are working on branding right now go into this with the absolute right intent. They want the best people and they want to deliver the best products or services. But what they haven't done is taken a step back and looked at how their processes are either supporting or undermining the promises they are making. So the thing I suggest to people is don't just make promises. Prove those promises by having a process that illustrates you do exactly what it is you say you do.
Let's dive a bit deeper on this, and let's take a look at the interview process from the candidate's perspective. And again, if I make the parallel between customer experience and employee experience, we can easily see how the customer journey can apply to the candidate's journey. So what are the do's and the don'ts companies must keep in mind when it comes to building a positive employee experience?
So I love this because it brings up one of my favorite distinctions when it comes to creating a positive employee experience that is customer-centric, because the employees are your customers. They're either buying into you and your opportunities or not. So the distinction I'll put into a question for everybody to consider. And here's that question. Do you want your employment brand, your candidate experience, to be seen as being like an episode of reality show Survivor or a red carpet experience? So if you all take a step back, in fact, I had an editorial cartoon. And I'll describe it to you. I commissioned this. I have a candidate standing at a fork in a road. To her left is what I call old company. That is the old way of hiring. And it is this path. And through the path is a hoop of fire, a pit of alligators, another pit filled with razors, some hurdles. And finally, when you get through all of that, you get to the door. And the candidate is asking herself, is that who I want to work for? Do I want to go through all of that to get to that company? And then on the right, you have what's called new company, the new way of hiring. And what you see is a red carpet. And along each side of the red carpet are the red velvet ropes, making it clear that only certain people get down this path. And while there is a path, it isn't just, letting anybody in the door. It's clearly faster. It's clearly easier. It's more concise. So that's what I put out to people in regards to if you're going to look at how you're creating candidate experience, supporting or undermining your employment brand, you first have to look at this from the candidate perspective and how are they seeing things. The rule of thumb I find is the more talented somebody is, the less hoops they're willing to jump through. In fact, they're beginning to expect that they're going to get that red carpet experience and not have to experience something that's like the show Survivor.
Oh, yeah. When you think of a simple thing as easy as resume submission, right?
Yes.
With the job bites and similar platforms where you have to upload the resume, and then it's going to populate some of the information in your resume. Then you still have to enter the exact same information in different fields, and then you have to. It just doesn't make sense. It's an awful experience.
Exactly. It's so, again, it goes back to it's so incongruent. As customers buying products and services, and Amazon is the overused example, so let me overuse it as well. Amazon keeps proving that fast gets faster. Mm-hmm. They went from that Prime 2-day delivery to implementing those Amazon Dash buttons where I can just press a button and that product's going to be to me in 2 days, to an Alexa service, and I won't say to Alexa actually she's going to turn on right now. She's right by my desk, so she may say something. But my wish is Alexa's command. And then I also have this faster than fast service called Amazon Now, where I not only can order something through an app right now, but I can have it within 2 hours. They are the shining example of fast getting faster. It's not that hard to press a dash button to order something, but they improved upon that. We have to do the same thing in hiring. We have to look at it from a candidate perspective. And yes, it's been said many times that we want to, we'll often audit our own experiences in hiring, and we'll go through our own process. But sometimes we can't see through our own smoke and mirrors. We justify that we have to have this step, otherwise we're going to miss details, and that's not the way to look at it. That's why I start big picture of think of this like either a reality show or a red carpet experience,
right?
And find all the ways you can make it fast and efficient without undermining accuracy.
And I would even say that the candidate experience and candidate journey is part of the entire employee journey. And the thing is, those different groups or departments are individualized and siloed. So you have recruiting on one side, then you have HR during the onboarding process, then you have the hiring manager actually overseeing the day-to-day operations of the person hired. But they look at the entire journey through their own lenses, and there's no holistic view of what the entire journey should be, right? So again, and it's exactly the same on the customer side as well. When you think of a retailer, for instance, what happens in the store usually doesn't connect to what happens online. So the experience as a whole is broken from the consumer's perspective, and you could see the same from the employee perspective. Now, the candidate experience may be great, but again, some of the promises were over-exaggerated, right? And what happens when the person comes on board is not really what was sold to that person. So then there has to be a sort of holistic approach of what is the entire employee journey from the job search to the exit interview, I would say.
Stefan, I love this journey thing. You've said the word probably 8 times.
I'm a big fan of journey mapping.
Rightfully so. It is. It is a journey. There is a journey that begins with selection and ends with exit. And everything in between determines when that exit happens, mm-hmm. and whether somebody walks in the door. And we have to look at it like this. And I'm going to play off your word journey. We need to take a step back from a strategic perspective and ask ourselves a critical question. And that question is, what kind of journey do we want our people to have? Why are they on this journey in the first place?
Yes.
What are the goals of the journey? What do we want them to get, and what do we need to get from them? Because this is a mutually beneficial relationship. And if we ask ourselves that question, then we can look at our process and say, okay, what's incongruent with the journey that we want people to be on? Look, if we want people to be on a really difficult journey with lots of repetitive steps, I loved what you talked about of having implement the information on twice. It's one of the things I hear from candidates, just the simple things we could be eliminating from the hiring process that are prevalent in the hiring process. Double entry, triple entry, quadruple entry of information. If we want a long, drawn-out process, and if that's the message we want to send, if we want to send a message that, we don't make decisions nimbly, we make them with fear. If we want people to have a journey that's full of struggle, then by all means, let's not change the process. But otherwise, let's look at carefully what kind of journey do we want people to be on, no matter how long that career is. What do we want their experience to be? And if we then take step by step and we look at every part of the process, from the first time they have contact with the company, to the first interaction by phone or email, to the first interview, to the second, to the offer being made, to their onboarding, through their first few months, through their first few years, if we remove anything and everything that's incongruent, employer brand can only get better. Company reputation can only just skyrocket because we're doing something that is completely congruent with what we decided we wanted to do in the first place.
Now, let me ask you a question about how can we measure the effectiveness or the discrepancy of the candidate experience, right? So now it's all about data and metrics and measurements, right? What are some of the metrics that you see or that you recommend companies should put in place to not only measure how good or poor the candidate experience is, but also what impact it has on the business as a whole? Meaning, for instance, if you're looking for a salesperson, right, the longer it takes to hire that person, the less revenue you're going to generate during the interim. Right, so those are pretty easy metrics to put in place and things to measure when it comes to should we hire faster? Is our interviewing process, recruiting process way too long so that we're losing opportunities to increase productivity, sell more? What are your thoughts on this?
I'm glad you brought up metrics, because if we don't measure it, we don't know whether we're improving or we're backsliding. So let me give you my three favorites. Mm-hmm. My first one is called Zero to Fill. The promise in my book, High Velocity Hiring, it's in the subtitle, How to Hire Top Talent in an Instant. The process that I've laid out allows companies to fill one, several, or all of their roles the moment they open. And that's how you implement it, is you start with one and you expand from there. The measurement of success is zero fill, or zero to fill, a zero time to fill. It's a double entendre. It takes 0 days to fill that job, and at the end of the day, you have 0 of those jobs left to fill. That is zero to fill. Once you implement this process, that is the measurement. The moment a job opens, we fill it because we've actively recruited talent. We've cultivated people and waited for the right jobs to show up. So the moment that starts to creep above 0, we know we're not living the promise for the journey that we wanted to create for people. The second metric is what I call ROR, return on recruiting. This measures how many hires result from your efforts. I've seen companies get that down to as low as 1 hire for every 4 hours invested. And they tend to do that actively. Now, how do they do that? Well, it takes a lot less time to cultivate people ahead of time than to fill the job once it becomes open. Why? Because of that thing I said before, the manager having 3 jobs at once. The last one is new hire churn. And I've changed the language on that. I believe that we need to look at the churn of our new hires. And I like to look at the first 90 days. I certainly look at it the first 6 months as well in the first year, but I start with those first 90 days. And my experience with people who have a zero to fill, a very efficient return on recruiting, is that the companies who do those things have reduced yearly churn of new hires to less than 1%. And if you think about it, Stefan, that's a stunning statistic, but not surprising. Now, why is that not surprising? Well, if we've done the things we've talked about today, we've collaborated with hiring managers, communicated effectively on the deal makers and the deal breakers, and got those down pat. If we're putting in a process that's more like a red carpet experience versus an episode of Survivor, if we are recruiting actively, we've started with one role and cultivated people before we need them. If we're conducting better interviews that allow us to see proof that people fit and not promises they give us that they can fit in. And if we're doing all of that with speed, we're going to get it right. We're going to create not only good hires, but an experience from the very beginning that sends a very clear, confident message that this is a company that knows what it's doing. And that's where top talent are going to want to go. You're going to have the situation where talented people are clamoring through HR and to hiring managers directly because all of their friends have told them, wow, in fact, the people who didn't get jobs often are the biggest advocates. They say, wow, I didn't get the job, but what a great experience. That's one of the greatest signs this is working. And those 3 measurements help us make sure we're staying on track.
And as consumers now, we are looking for less standardized experiences and more personalized and individualized experiences. And obviously, many of this is now possible through technology. Right, some automation, some personalization, different communication channels, so you can really communicate with specific individuals on very specific channels. Do you see the same applying to the candidate experience, where people would have more of a personalized experience when they interact with an employer or potential employer?
I do, and I'll give you a specific example. A few weeks back, I watched one of the fastest, most accurate hires ever made for a high-level position. So it was a director of IT, and the director of IT was offered the job, and rightly so, 33 minutes into the first face-to-face interview.
No kidding.
Yeah. And it's one of the best hires they've made. Yes, it was weeks ago, but the changes and the improvements he's made already, how he's won people over. And this was a department that was in turmoil. So how did that happen? Well, you and I just talked a moment ago what this experience might look like. It was very similar to that in most ways. This company, once we implemented this process, committed to 2 interviews. First, a phone interview. And that's important. Phone interviews still have their place.
Yes.
The content doesn't matter as much as the communication and the rapport. Because if we think about it, candidates are always on their best behavior. So when you ask them questions, they have thought out answers. I call it the tell, sell, and swell. They tell interviewers what they think interviewers want to hear. They sell the best parts of their abilities and background, and they try to swell egos. And I'm not trying to infer that people are being deceitful. It's only natural that people put their best selves forward. So in a phone interview, I'm not so worried about content because of that, but I want to know, how are we communicating, and get a baseline. But then I want to have the face-to-face interview, and that's what happened here. But in this company, they've started doing that by video. And that's allowed them to recruit more quickly and nimbly from all over the world. And getting this candidate in the door would have been preferable, but they couldn't do that quickly, and he was actively interviewing other places. So in the video interview, they did what I called an experiential interview. It's a hands-on interview where you have the candidate do sample work. And it's not sample work for compensation. It's just sample work. It's of no inherent value to the company. It is for assessment purposes only. And so in this conversation that only took 32 minutes before the offer was made, they created a scenario, a real scenario. They brought forth a problem, and they had the candidate demonstrate in a real mock kind of conversation how he would solve that business-related problem. He solved it in 32 minutes. It took the actual leaders in the organization weeks and weeks. But he collaborated, he asked the right questions, he conducted a leadership-style meeting. That was the mock interview. And in 32 minutes, the CIO was in the conversation. He stopped it. He kind of surprised the candidate. The candidate thought he'd screwed up. And the CIO says, okay, hold on, I've got to stop this right now. And they're all on video, and he waves people over, and they're whispering in each other's ears like on one of those TV shows. And the CIO looks up and said, we want to hire you right now. And the candidate, I talked to him afterwards, he said, I was stunned. I've never been offered a job so quickly. But he said something interesting. He said it wasn't like in a first date where, this weirdo asked you to marry them and you don't know them very well. He said because of the experience, he was so comfortable because he actually had worked with these people in the mock scenario. He got to experience 32 minutes working side by side or video by video of his colleagues. He said based on how we collaborated and worked together and got along and how open. He said it was clear and obvious. Those are important words. Clear and obvious that I needed to take this job. And weeks later, he said, spot on. It's even better than I thought. And that's the beauty of this. It doesn't usually happen that quickly. But this is how quickly and accurately we can hire if we put the right process in place. And we can use technology in these personalized experiences like you talked about and have it be so meaningful but efficient for the candidate and the hiring team.
That's a great story. I even read an article a few months ago about a company in the Silicon Valley, obviously, who developed a video game. It's for recruiting purposes. Mm-hmm. And companies using that video game can predict at a very high level if the candidate is a right fit for a position. Mm-hmm. By doing some, playing with the game, doing some difficult and easy tasks and how they think about solving those issues on the game, they can really predict whether or not the candidate is the right fit for the organization, which is it's far stretched from regular hiring process when you go through the phone interview and then you may have a couple of in-person interviews. Do you see those type of experiences as the future of recruiting?
I do. I don't. Well, let me back up. And sorry for this horrible pun that's coming. We have to eliminate how people can game the system. And I'm not trying to throw this video game that you talked about under the bus. I believe anything that allows us to see proof, not promises, is the future of recruiting. Now, what do I mean by that? In a conventional interview, that's where we have the tell, sell, and swell. People tell you what you want to hear. They sell the best parts of their background. They swell your ego. Talk is cheap. It's been said for a long time. And so we've got to eliminate these talking interviews where we ask questions and hope people give us honest answers. You know what? Let's assume they are. They're still only telling us the best parts. And this is why when people show up on the first day, we go, what have we done? Anything that allows us to experience proof. And these are three magic words: see, hear, and experience. If we can see proof that somebody is a potential fit, if we can hear how they'll fit in and work with their colleagues, if we can experience the quality of their work, anything that allows us to do this, to see proof instead of rely on their promises, this is the future of recruiting. And we're going to see more and more technology. We're also going to see more traditional experiences, interviews like I described, but retooled. So it's having people do sample work. When we combine technology and hands-on experiences in this way, we're going to have hiring that is as near bulletproof as it's ever been. But it takes all the things that we talked about today. We have to design, we have to take that step back, as we talked about early on, of making sure we're congruent with the journey we're defining and the experience that backs that up.
Yes, and it sounds like recruiting should be a lot of fun in the next few years if done well.
I agree. I you know what? It's never been. I've been in for 30 years, and I'm smiling as I say this. It's so much fun. And part of what's fun about it is, think about it. This is the hardest sell on the planet. When you're recruiting, when you're in talent acquisition, you're actually recruiting the only product that you're going to sell to a hiring manager that can say no. You sell somebody a car, it doesn't change its mind and leave you the next day and drive away. Well, Teslas can drive themselves, but that's a whole different story. This is the hardest sell on the planet: selling opportunity, selling the services of people, whether you're an internal talent acquisition professional or an external recruiter. This is a hard sell because people have free will. I think that's what makes this exciting. And to me, any tweaks that we can make to the process that make it more accurate and faster while enhancing the experience, oh man, that's awesome. Because for everybody then, we're having these efficient, effective, engaging experiences for all parties. And that's why I wrote this book, is hiring was broken. It was very clear to me that the old way wasn't sustainable anymore. We have to do something different. And to your point, there's all kinds of things coming down the path. People are starting to take notice, and it's getting better. Slowly, it's getting better. And so, these kind of conversations like you and I are having today to help people make these changes faster are so critical. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to be on your podcast, Stephanie, is this idea of employee experience is still very new and it's often misunderstood. And you're bringing light to a subject where it helps people in a very tangible way do something about something that's critically important.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot of work to do on this as well. So before we conclude this episode, let me ask you a few fun questions. First of all, if you were to invite a historical figure or a personality to dinner, who would that be and why?
Well, he is now a historical figure. I would have said, I'm going to give you two answers. At one point, I would have said Abraham Lincoln. I'm fascinated by what he did in such times of turmoil. It shows me that we can overcome many things. And you think about how our country was being torn apart at that time here in the United States. But I'm going to change it for the sake of today. And for today, it's Robin Williams. I will never forget the day that I was sitting at my dinner table with my wife, Holly, and the alert came up on my phone. I wish I had my phone turned over because it ruined my dinner, that he had died. He is truly one of the most creative, most engaging, most brilliant human beings I've ever met. And he's an inspiration for me in my work. I believe in laughter and laughing at all I can, laughing at myself especially. And he was such an incredible loss. But he shows us that he had a troubled life and took his own life in the end, but pushed through that for many years. And to me, he's an inspiration of what we're all capable of if we can push past our own pain.
Yeah, I would imagine that actually, if you want to go on a diet, you could have invited Robin Williams for dinner. I mean, you would laugh so much that you wouldn't even eat at all.
I hadn't thought of it that way. That's true. I wouldn't get much eating done.
What is the essential item that you always take with you when you go on vacation?
Ooh, my essential item. That would be my travel steamer. I'm not a really vain person. I have no hair. I'm a bald guy. And there's certain things. I know you are. That's why I put that out there. I wear that with pride, as I suspect you do as well.
I do.
But it is the travel steamer. You know what it is? I'm not vain about stuff, but it wrinkles. My latest trip, I was very grateful when I pulled out a couple of shirts and went, oh, that's not going to do. So yeah, that thing's amazing. That little thing pumps out steam where I could take down wallpaper if I needed to.
So going back to dinner, what is your favorite food?
Oh, that's hard. So, what is my favorite? I don't have one favorite food. With that said, I just spent some time in Ecuador over the Thanksgiving holiday, and just what a magical experience. And I had some veg. I love vegetables. I love meat. I love all kinds of food except for weird stuff. And I especially love vegetables and just the flexibility. And I had some vegetable dishes there that were just out of this world, preparations of them and fresh vegetables that just stunned me. So that's what's top of mind right now. If you ask me next week, it's going to be a different answer, though, because I consider myself a bit of a foodie.
That's good. If you had to give one last word or last few words of wisdom for everything that we discussed today, what would you say?
There's another distinction I'd love to close with, and it's the distinction between diligence and duration. And they're not the same thing. And I know this is an obvious statement, but when you look at it and you're honest about it in your company, all too often people are making diligence and duration the same thing. They think that because they're taking lots of time, lots of effort to hire, lots of steps, 5 rounds of interviews followed by reference checks, testing, and background checks. They believe because of that duration that they're being diligent. It's not. Diligence is different today. Diligence happens quickly. And if we do our due diligence quickly, a lot of great things happen. We actually create that amazing experience from the very start that ropes people in because they see you as a nimble, smart, confident organization. If you have diligence, but also depth, another D in your process, people think, and it's often unconscious, but they're impressed by the depth and how well thought out your process is. If we just look at an Amazon, how quickly they allow us to diligently buy products, and the depth of experiences and products they give us, they're a great inspiration. So I would encourage everybody, look at the duration of your process. Question how diligent it really is. Ask yourself where you can speed that up. And be certain to go back to that big picture idea that we heard from Stefan today about the journey. What is the journey that you want to create for people, for your customers, for your employees? Look for everywhere that it's incongruent and find a way to eliminate it.
Where can we find your book, and how can we follow you on social media?
So all your favorite booksellers will have the book. And you can also go to highvelocityhiring.com. That'll link you to your favorite booksellers. It'll also link you to more content. When you're on my site, if you click on the page for resources navigating at the top. You can sign up for my newsletter called Zero to Fill. You can also find lots of videos and content in my blog, and in there as well, if you just click on those different links, you'll find me on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. And if you just want to go to one of those right now, since Twitter is so popular, I am at Scott Wintrip on Twitter. And look forward to having conversations with all of you. I'd love to hear what were some of the standout things as you listen to this on Twitter, and I promise I'll retweet your wisdom. So look forward to meeting you out on Twitter.
All right, and we'll share all this information on the podcast notes as well. Well, Scott, thanks so much for a very engaging and fascinating conversation on the presence and the future of recruiting and talent acquisition.
Stefan, thank you. You are doing really, really important work. And I think you're right. You're going to be at this for many years because even as mastery comes to customer experience, there are going to be whole new ways for us to take this that we haven't even seen yet.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.